Today on No Greater Love with Pastor Jeff Kramer.
You know, this is true in Jacob's life, and I think this is true in my life, and perhaps it's true in your life. The delay often occurs because God is working in the nastiness of our own hearts. You ever think about that? And difficult relationships here on earth, they may never be perfect, but guess what? God will make them better for your sake. Because you're one of His, He'll make them better.
Through innocent blood, He showed His love, taking the cross for us. No greater love than innocent blood.
Welcome to No Greater Love with Pastor Jeff Kramer. Today we're focusing on the life of Jacob, a man who's a great example of just being human. He's a perfect display of someone who has an encounter with God and experiences real change. We gain insight into his life across a spectrum of trials and triumphs. Times when he failed to trust God and took matters into his own hands. Moments of anxiety and stress when he faced major uncertainty. Seasons of taking steps of faith and leaving his comfort zone because God had called him to obey. Seasons when he failed in his fatherly leadership to his brood of children. And yet, they were the chosen family of God. What a testimony he has. I'm sure we all can relate to the very things he struggled with thousands of years ago. So let's join Pastor Jeff now in our study through Genesis.
And the details of the situation may not change much, but what God alleviates within your life and with my life is that He works on our behalf. And as He's working on our behalf, we can expect His help. We can approach these things with hope. We can know that in the middle of our failure that He is faithful. Amen? All right, here we are. We're in the middle of this story here. Let's string a few things together as we go forward, okay? These will be briefly on the screen here. It's just to help link them in your mind as we go. Okay, the family feud that took place in Genesis 27. We read about this. We saw the breakdown happen, and it left relationships broken. As we moved into chapter 28, Jacob, he went on the run. And he moved north. He took off. He took that solo journey for 450 miles from Bethlehem. He went all the way up here, all the way up to the Fertile Crescent at the top there with where Uncle Laban is. And he lived with extended family members for this 20-year period of time. We saw, as we've gone through these chapters, in chapter 29 and chapter 30, we saw that while Jacob continued his life, his family grew. He got one wife, and then he got another wife, and then, everybody's in competition to see how many kids they can have, and, he ends up walking away with 12 boys and a girl, right? I mean, so his family grew over the segment of these years, and God was doing something amazing. And then 2 decades go by, this is last week here in Genesis 31, that God stirs up a season of change within him, and Jacob gets word from God that God is ordering him back to go back to his past, to go back to his hometown. And he didn't know how it was going to go, right? 20 years ago, he left. This dude is 97 years old at this point in time. And that is so encouraging to me, why we don't live as long as they lived in this particular time. Yet the encouragement that comes through is that God is never done with us until we breathe our last breath upon this earth. And whether you're young or you're old and you have family trauma for a long time, or you're a blended family, or you don't know what's up or what's down, or you're just growing in Jesus, whatever your condition is, that God is faithful to meet us right where we are, and that He lifts us into His purposes when we're willing to follow Him. And these changes are being played out on the pages of Scripture here. And so we come to the very first idea of tonight, and that is the past is catching up. Follow with me, Genesis 32, verses 1 through 8. Here's what it says. It says that Jacob went on his way, and the angels, plural, of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Mahanaim is how you pronounce it. It says, and then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, "Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight." And then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Uh-oh. And so Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two companies. And he said, if Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company, which is left, will escape. Well, if you were paying attention to some of the words that we read there in this, that you see that Jacob is sidestepping what God has given to him. That Jacob moved into this place and he was the one that God wanted to use, not Esau. It was Jacob. God chose him early on. He chose him before they came out of the womb, right? We've learned this along the way. But in the sidestepping of everything, he's doing what Jacob does. Jacob's a heel catcher. He's a manipulator, and he's putting the spin on his brother again. Oh, my Lord Esau. I mean, he does it multiple times and trying to butter him up and all of this stuff because he knows his brother, he's a man of the field. You know, Esau's a man of the field. He's a hunter. And now he's coming after Jacob, or to Jacob, if you will, with 400 guys. He should be scared in his natural mind. And yet what God has told Jacob before he even got to this point, on that path of leaving and going through Bethel, as he taken off 20 years earlier, is that God told him that he was going to be with him. He was going to sustain him, that he's going to bring him back safely. He would return safely. And isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? How God has spoken to us through his word. And we get those little promises and we sense the Holy Spirit speaking to us. And a decade goes by and 2 decades go by and we forget those promises. And we forget to live in the faith that was so stirred within our heart. That's where Jacob's at. He forgot these promises coming out of Genesis 28 and 15. He forgot everything that God said to him. And now he's back to trying to adjust, manipulate, fend for himself, and make sure he's protected. He's using human wisdom and human logic. And he's all, okay, I'm gonna send the waves of my stuff before him. I'll divide the flocks, I'll divide the servants, and I'll just start buttering up Esau and all of this stuff. And you can see his manipulation right at work. God has brought him to this point. God, this is no surprise. God brought him to this crisis point for a reason. And yet, as we look at this, maybe we understand some of the texture from the scene. Look at verse number 1 more time. Right there in verse number 1, we get this, we get the presence of God's protection hand right on this because Jacob went on his way and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them. I don't know what that looked like. I don't know how that transpired. I've never seen an angel. Again, I don't know anything like this. I just know that when we get into the scriptures, that God is doing something on his behalf. And maybe some of the overlooked areas of our life is that while the Bible is clear regarding these things, maybe you and I, maybe we forget about how angels interface and how they are ministering spirits sent forth from God himself. Take a look at the screen, Hebrews chapter 1. Verse number 14, I love this translation because it makes it easy. It says that angels are only servants. They're spirits sent to care for people who inherit salvation. That's for the people of God. That's for you and I. That literally there are angels that are dispatched into your life, into my life. Now, we're not sensationalizing this. We're not going to make a movie or write a crazy book and tell you all these, these fancy things. We're just going to simply take what God has placed within his word to encourage you and to grab the texture from the scene. He saw that this was happening. He saw the working of God's hand and what God had dispatched and the angels that were there to help him. He saw that. Now, we go on, and if we were to move a little bit farther here, perhaps we could come to Luke chapter 22. And in Luke chapter 22, verse 43, you'll also see this on the screen. This is with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. In his humanity there. It says, an angel appeared to Jesus from heaven, strengthening him. That's what the angels did for Jesus at that time. Again, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's fixing to get arrested. He's fixing to be crucified and all of that stuff. And in that moment, his humanity, right there in that moment, while he's yielded to the Father's will, that God sent angels to minister to his son in his humanity. And it's the same thing that he does for us. And I love that. Now, maybe I should add this along the way, and I would also encourage you to search this out, is that be it Old Testament or New Testament, anytime we have a reference to angels or we see angels take on a bodily form, it always comes in the male form. It is never female. Okay? Why is it shown that way in the scriptures? I don't know. I have no idea. But that's the way it is. And so whether it's Genesis 18 or Joshua 5, or you blast into the New Testament and start looking at the end of the Gospel of Mark 16, always in the male form, okay? And so just recognize that. Do your homework on it should you desire to go farther. But just realize that angels are ministering spirits. They do help us in the sense that God sends them forward for his plan, and they will strengthen us. In fact, the New Testament tells us that we're always to make sure that we're walking right and properly because some have unwittingly entertained angels. In other words, we could interface with an angel and not even know it. That's crazy, but cool if you think about it. Now, the final thing here about angels, I'll say, because this all ties together with what we're looking at, comes out of 2 Kings chapter 6. I'm not going to read you the verses. I'm just going to refer you to them. But this is with Elisha. You know, Elisha is in this place where he's hearing from God, and God is using him against the king of Syria. The king of Syria he's got a battle plan in place, and he keeps trying to mess up Israel and all this stuff. And God keeps ministering to Elisha and saying, hey, you know, go tell the Israel king, tell him this. These guys are going to be here, so just watch out. And in all of that, the king of Syria gets word of it. And now they're coming down, and they're going to take out Elisha. They're going to wipe him out. They're going to kill him and his servants. But what takes place in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 15, 16, 17? Well, we have a picture there where Elisha prays because his servant is freaking out. He's going, this is it. We're dead. We're never making it out of this house. They're all around us. And Elisha prays, and he says, God, he says, open the eyes of my servant, that he might see what's up. And when his eyes are opened, when God answered that prayer from Elisha, and his servant was able to see into the supernatural, if you will, he realized that they were surrounded by a mighty army of angels. In other words, gang, that you and I will never get into a place where the hand of God, the provisions of God, the presence of God's help is not readily with us. We may not always see it with our eyeballs, but he's there. He's there. And I want to make sure that I'm encouraging you with that. And so what's the point? Very simple, that there are several ways in which God can intervene into our lives and to help us. And man, I want to learn about all of those ways because I need all the help I can get. You know, years ago, you know, on the backside of the Jesus movement, people would say, "Oh man, that religion stuff, you just need a crutch in your life." You know, and the response from many of the Jesus freaks came up, no, I don't need a crutch. I need a stinking stretcher and an ambulance. I need the whole thing. Carry me through on this baby. And so, man, I feel like it's the same thing for me. Lord, don't give me a crutch. Carry me through on this thing. And so God has his ways of working things out. But with Jacob is in this place where we've got, the opening side of this chapter. I mean, he's moving into this spot here to where, his natural side is colliding with his emotions, and he's literally walking out this conflict between faith and fear as the past catches up with him. That's something that you and I can understand. Again, between faith and fear, it's like, it's like we read in the Gospels. We see the man that had the boy that was, he's plagued with epilepsy. Jesus called it demon possession. But in that, Jesus is casually talking to the dad as this dude's having a fit. He's in the middle of one of these demon-possessed moments and foaming at the mouth and all this stuff. And Jesus is just casually saying, well, all things are possible if you can believe and all this. And that dad sees his son just going through this torture, and he's all, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, help my weakness of faith. And that is something that you and I need, man. We need God to help us in our weakness of faith. That is something that Jacob needed in this moment. For God to help him in his weakness of faith here, he needed to remember that what he was seeing, that that in that moment, the protection of God was there via the angels. He needed to remember the promise that God already gave him. God already told him before he went up there 20 years previously, listen, I'm with you, and I'm going to bring you back safely. Nobody's going to harm you. You're going to make it back. You're going to be okay. And man, the promises of God, learning to accept them by faith so that we can conquer our fear that comes up in the moment by moment or the day by day. And so God's at work, things are happening, several decades have gone by here. And as we begin to look at our lives, I want to remind you that what God is doing, and I guess I'll use my life because I shared a little story already with you. But it might take several decades for something to work out. But you and I are to leave our struggles in the hands of God. because he's the one that brings healing. And maybe you will find it fascinating to remember some of the things from Scripture. Take a look at the screen for a second. Proverbs 16:7. Here's what it says on the screen. It says, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. God was doing that work, but he still had a lesson there for Jacob. And as we walk through this, gang, until God brings our particular things to pass, there are a couple things that we should know. We should realize that our actions and our attitudes are to live peaceably with all men. And in this, in the holiday time of year, the turning of a year, special events, be it birthdays, anniversaries, heck, even funerals and all that stuff. These are those moments where hearts can become either bitter or better. And for you guys as Christians, I want you to realize that you're instruments of God's healing. You're instruments of God's presence there within your family. And so for that work has got to be within us first. There's those actions and those attitudes that we have to live peaceably with all men. And practically, if I could just exhort you, I guess, practically I would say that we have to drop the argumentative spirit of wanting to be right. And we have to learn how to be kind and gentle. There's a country song out there. If you don't like country music, just throw up. I don't care. And I don't know how it goes. But I saw the title on it. I'm just a guy or something like that. I don't even know if it's a good song, so don't listen to it. Probably a terrible song. Who knows? But I'm trying to share with you the understanding is that very simple. Is that we all like to be right. We all like to have our point. Well, listen, we're upset and we're having these things because of X. We've got to drop the argumentative spirit. You may have to reach across the aisle to your own family members here. And man, I'm so grateful for what Jody did yesterday. Hey, just try it, man. See what happens. What do you got to lose? You're not in a relationship now. You got nothing to lose. Just give it a shot. And I wrestled with it for like 24 hours and then I did it, man. I did it, this morning as I share with you guys. I texted my dad and it worked out. Is he healed? Nope. It's sure not. But it was an opportunity for me not to be argumentative. It was an opportunity for me to be kind. It was an opportunity, to be gentle, if you will. And I sent him a family photo. We did family Christmas photos here this past Saturday. In fact, if you're here, you'll get some this Sunday. But I sent him, like the little picture on your phone and all that stuff. And it's like, hey, man, maybe this will soften his heart when he sees the grandbabies, He doesn't know about all these grandbabies. Maybe that would soften his heart. Well, I got a heart and one of those. I'll take it. It's a start. And so, what's the deal? Well, think about this. This is true in Jacob's life, and I think this is true in my life, and perhaps it's true in your life. The delay often occurs because God is working in the nastiness of our own hearts. You ever think about that? And difficult relationships here on earth, they may never be perfect, but guess what? God will make them better. For your sake, because you're one of his, he'll make them better. And so we move into the second idea of tonight, and that is as we get down to verse 9, roughly through 20. Again, gang, we're just arcing over the top of this stuff. It says this in verse 9. It says, then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and O God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I love this. Here he is, finally. And regardless of what he's seen with his eyes, he saw the angels. He got a little freaked out, right? We're reading this as though it's like, oh, this all happened in 30 seconds. No. This is played out with a little bit of span of time, right? Because these servants had to go and to come back, and they're traveling by foot and all this stuff. So we got a little bit of time gap here in between this stuff. But as it's all being played out, now finally he's in this point in verse number 9 where he's beginning to draw upon the faithfulness of God. He's going back to the promises with Abraham and Isaac, right? His father, his grandfather, all of these things. And even what God had said to him. I hope you have a godly lineage. I hope that you have those things that are passed down. I hope that you've got those sayings that are within your family that are consistent with Scripture and all of that stuff. I hope that you have those things rummaging around within your mind as you were growing up. I know that I've had the chance to have those. I was a bad kid, and I can remember going all the way back to my teenage years that my dad would send me to work with my grandfather, and my grandfather was a master craftsman and all this stuff. And some of the first times of being in the construction field with them as a family. I was doing a roof with him, and he's up there. These old timers, they set the roof with these plumb bobs and all this stuff. We do it totally different now. But man, he was telling me, a job worth doing, Jeffrey boys, a job worth doing right the first time and all this stuff. Listen, I'm 52 years old, and that stuff rings through to my head right now, and I pass that off onto my kids. No matter what they're doing. What's the point? What's the point in all this? Take a look at Psalm 18 on the screen. 18, verse 25 and 26. Remember what God has said. He says, to the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To those with integrity, you show integrity. To the pure, you show yourself pure. And then it gets a little rough right here. But to the crooked, you show yourself shrewd. Listen, how has God worked so far in the book of Genesis? What have we seen? Some notes on the screen. God showed up as a traveler to Abram, the pilgrim, in Genesis 18. God showed up to Joshua, the general, as a soldier all the way over there in Joshua chapter 5. But what is he fixing to do here with Jacob? Well, God's fixing to show up with Jacob, who was a wrestler, okay? God's going to show up in this scene of right there wrestling with Jacob. Because what did Jacob do all of his life? He wrestled with people. And I love that about God. Even though Jacob is coming to this place to where a desperate prayer is fixing to spill out of his heart, you and I can remember, and we can look upon not only the Psalms, but what we've seen so far in the book of Genesis, and we can see how God meets people where they're at. And I love that. He meets people right where they're at. And we can understand this. Okay, so Wiersbe says this right here. Take a look right here. That God meets us where we're at to lift us where he wants us to be. Let's give him credit for that. He's the one that came up with that, not me. And so I love that. And I want you to understand that about Psalm 18. I want you to understand that about all this, the different things that we have read and we've come across already within this. And I want you to recognize it for your life, that God meets people right where they're at to lift us where he wants us to be. That's special. And so as we would, if we would go back to Genesis 28 and 15, we would see that God had already given him that promise, that God was already going to bring him to safety. But some time has gone by. And while Jacob began to hear of God right there in Genesis 28, the full submission to him trusting God through the difficulties of life, it hasn't happened yet. He's like coming to that place right here in this chapter. But as this stuff is getting closer and closer and closer, there's a crisis point that is going to happen here as he wrestles with God. And God brings a limp into his life. And I don't know if God has brought a limp into your life in any area so that you would fully trust him. But he's going to do this here with Jacob. And so we come to the final idea of the night, idea number 3, and that is the scar that changed me. Genesis 32. Take a look. Scroll your eyes all the way down. I think I'll pick up in verse 21 or so. It says that, so the present went on over before him. So he's sending gifts over to his brother. But he himself lodged that night in the camp. Jacob stayed behind. And it says that he rose that night and he took 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of the Jabbok. Okay, so he just crossed the river. He says he took them, he sent them over the brook, and he sent over what he had. Now watch. Then Jacob was left alone. So there he is. He started this journey 20 years earlier in Genesis 28 alone, taking that trip on the run, 450 miles, moving to the north. Now he's back, working his way from the reverse, coming from the north, coming back down. And as he's working his way back, he's apart from his wife, his children, his servants, everything. He's there all alone. And God has to get us alone sometimes so that we can wrestle out the details of what he wants to do. And so Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now, when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him.
That's all for today. Join us for our next broadcast of No Greater Love with Pastor Jeff Kramer, weekdays at 10:30 a.m. No Greater Love is an outreach ministry of Westminster Calvary and is supported by listeners like you. If you would like to partner with us, please text GIVE to 720-354-6485. Your donation of any amount helps keep No Greater Love on the air, ministering to thousands across the Front Range. We would like to personally invite you to join us for our weekly worship services, Sundays at 8 or 10 a.m. and Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. We are located in Westminster, Colorado, on the northeast corner of Church Ranch and Wadsworth Parkway, near the Fossa Fitness. If you're not local, tune into the weekly live stream on our web campus, app, Roku, or on Apple TV. Have you downloaded the free Westminster Calvary app yet? You can stay up to date on upcoming events, join a small group, request prayer, and watch live worship services. Just search Westminster Calvary on your favorite app store today. Lastly, we're a church that's ready to serve you. If we can do so, give us a call at 303-223-4640. And remember, there's no greater love than when Jesus gave up his life for you and me. Thanks, and God bless.